Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is Linda Peek Schacht from Lipscomb University. She's teaching a couple of courses at Lipscomb about President Trump's first 100 days in office. She was in the first 100 days of the Carter White House, and she's taught classes about this before, both at Lipscomb and at other universities. Linda, how is the first 100 days, how has Donald Trump changed the presidency and changed Washington?
He's changed the presidency in that he has abandoned some of the expected behaviors of a president, and I don't mean the ones that people talk about a lot in terms of his 3:30 a.m. morning tweets. I'm talking more about the fact that there's no longer a log of who goes into the White House and other transparency issues like releasing your tax returns or revealing conflicts of interest.
He came in saying he was going to do these things. He was very, very strong about it, but it appears to me over the almost 100 days, the presidency has changed him too. How has it changed him over these 90-plus days so far?
Well, let me stay for a minute on how he's changed the presidency. I think the world, particularly world leaders, looked to a president to be basically consistent and stable in his communication. And that's not what we're getting from President Trump. And there are some people who think that it's deliberate. Supposedly, Henry Kissinger has an idea of the madman theory, that if the world thinks you're slightly crazy, then they'll give you a broad berth. And well, some people think he's playing that game a little bit.
President Trump has said he wants to keep people guessing, and I guess he's in that regard he's doing a pretty good job.
He is doing that. What it also means is that sometimes he is at odds with things that his cabinet members are saying,
and his staff.
It also means that on some of the things that he ran on, he's made considerable changes in terms of his current position. For instance, NATO.
So has he learned, though, that this job is much more complicated, not just in healthcare, but perhaps across the board?
Oh, I think he has. I don't necessarily think that he thinks he has to change in order to deal with how complicated it is. And I come back to one thing, and that is he is using, of all of his staffers and the people supporting him, he is using the generals. And we should all feel, I think, much better that he is turning to the generals for their expertise.
He talked a lot when he came in about draining the swamp in Washington. Is the swamp being drained, or is he being slowly sucked into the mire and the muck there himself?
Well, I think he himself added to the swamp when he brought in the Goldman Sachs, Cohen and others into his White House staff. And I don't think while he did have the executive order about lobbying, White House officials being able to leave and lobby, I don't think you see much difference in the swamp, whether it's on Capitol Hill or in his administration.
Along with having to have the Congress deal with how we're going to deal with the debt limit, which we've had several times before, we teetered on the brink of a government shutdown, actually had them sometimes before. We also have to have a budget going forward. The current budget expires at the end of April. The federal budget year goes through the end of September. He's got a problem there because he may not have the Republicans in the House or the Senate to pass that. So that means he's got to rely on Democrats. What kind of horse trader is him? What kind of horse traders are the Democrats going to be? Because they've got limits they can do.
Well, that's right. They have limits because the resist movement is very strong, continues to be strong, and there are Democrats and Democratic groups that do not want any of their public officials to help Donald Trump do anything. I think that's probably the wrong position to take. I also think that, and this happened last week on Syria, Democrats, whether they're at the local level, state level, federal level, need to be able to praise President Trump when he does something right, when he moves in the direction that they approve, like the Syrian strike, for instance.
The president had put out his own budget ideas, a sharp increase in military spending, lots of cuts in domestic spending, but now what he has to get Congress to pass may not include all those because he can't get the votes for that. What's going to happen on Planned Parenthood? What's going to happen, say, on funding for the wall?
Well, if Democrats were able to get organized, they might decide there were one or two things they were going to hold out for in order to give him some votes. But I wouldn't look for that. I remember what happened, and you do too, to Newt Gingrich when he let the government shut down during the Clinton years. And it did not bode well for that speaker, and it didn't bode well for the Republicans.
if the president backs off some of the things he's talking about in the budget, he may undermine himself with some of his own base. And already there's a Gallup poll that came out earlier this week that showed 45% of those surveyed now believe that President Trump does not keep his promises. Now, that was a 62% number back in February. That's an 11-point drop among Republicans, 9% among conservatives. Is the president beginning to develop a credibility gap problem?
We knew what we were getting with President Trump, and those Republicans knew what they were getting. I think that his changes on things like NATO and Syria and some other big issues, his failure to get Obamacare repealed and replaced, his failure to get the immigration executive order through the courts. I think all of those things are combining to an idea of, can this guy really get things done? I don't know it's so much that he's not keeping his promises, although that was the question, but I think there's an element of, is this guy competent? Does he know how to operate within the government?
Well, there seems to be a dichotomy about his job performance numbers. Rasmussen's poll certainly shows it with job numbers around 50%. But Gallup has a very different poll out this week that shows him with the lowest numbers on average of any president since they started taking that poll back in the 1950s.
That's right. They show him as having the lowest average rating in the first quarter. The average for most presidents was around 61, and his average was around 41. And so he does have job approval issues, not just that it's the lowest ever, but also the people that are causing those fluctuations are independents, because Democrats are pretty much holding firm that, you know, they're giving him low ratings. The independents and some of the moderate Republicans are the ones that are in that swing.
Linda Peek Schacht from Lipscomb University is our guest on Inside Politics. She's teaching some courses on the first 100 days of the Donald Trump White House and administration. Back to continue our conversation after this break.